Good afternoon, all. This is my analysis of The Ocean at the End of the Lane by Neil Gaiman. I finished this book for the second time about 2 weeks ago. As I mentioned in my introduction earlier in the semester, I first read this book a couple of years ago. At that time, I found it to be an interesting little book, though there were parts of it I found somewhat confusing. I won't comment on those areas because after reading it a second time, I found it much more cohesive and readable. I believe my first experience with the book reflects more on my readiness as a reader and writer to make sense of it. The second reading that I just finished was more accomplished more with the writing in mind and the effect it had on me as a reader. This in no way detracted from my experience. I believe it heightened and opened me up to more possibilities than the obvious ones. I really like the device he uses of the adult sitting by the duck pond, contemplating the memory of events from his childhood. Going back in his memory to relate the story and returning to that space to bring closure was very effective. More effective is the fact that he's just come from a funeral. It opens up vulnerability for him to examine the past. The epilogue finds him sitting on the bench by the pond, examining his memories and trying to make sense of them. One of my favorite quotes happens here when old Mrs. Hempstock comes to sit with him on page 173. She says, "You come back sometimes," she said. "You were here once when you were 24, I remember. You had 2 young children and you were so scared. You came here before you left this part of the world. You were what, in your 30s then? I fed you a good meal in the kitchen and you told me about your dreams and the art you were making." "I don't remember." She pushed the hair from her eyes. "It's easier that way." I like this quote as a reminder that we remember what our hearts can bear in the size of pieces we can process. In the interview I listened to, it was mentioned that the boy has no name. I thought that was interesting. It is the story of this individual that is rendered universal to all adults with the unexplainable childhood memories. The entire family of this young boy has no names. They are identified by their relationship to each other. The Hempstock family have names, although only Letty, the 11-year-old, has a proper first name that is used routinely. Her mother, Jenny, is referred to occasionally by name, but mostly they are called Mrs. Hempstock and Old Mrs. Hempstock. I think the device of keeping names to a minimum helped to keep the focus on the story. This is a battle between good and evil, between Letty Hempstock and Ursula Monckton. Everyone else is a pawn in the story. As writers, we know we have to be careful about the names we choose for our characters, as readers have impressions about some character names based on their life experiences with someone of the same name. Gaiman circumvents this problem with the lack of names. It is done so skillfully it is barely noticeable. What personalized the story for me was the fact that I have some bizarre memories of my childhood in which there are unexplained gaps, making the memory even more bizarre. The first thing that came to my mind as I read it for the second time was whether or not this is a fantasy in which this really happened, or if this is simply the culmination of the mixed up memories from childhood that make us believe in the possibility of fantasy. I'm not sure if it matters. I'm not sure we are meant to know this information. My interpretation was that this was a 7-year-old child's way to explain away some of the horror he saw in his life. The boarder who commits suicide in the back seat of his dad's car. Suddenly, good comes from that in that he desires to give everyone money from the grave. It is his desire that sparks the being in the form of Ursula Monckton, to arrive in this dimension with the help of the boy, facilitating her entrance when he turns loose of Letty's hand while she is trying to move the entity out of this world. It is an interesting concept, the presence of goodness and evil in tandem. Does one exist without the other, and does each contaminate the intent of the other? The boarder simply had a desire to right a wrong. The entity, Ursula Monckton, turned into something evil by omission or intent is not really significant. Ursula Monckton is an interesting personification of this. She is ultimately unpleasant, if not evil. She needs to be returned to her own dimension, or at least removed from this one. She is tied to being out in fields alone, loneliness, as well as dark skies and storms. She is the evil of a new nanny that takes over and tells everyone what to do. She is the evil that causes his father to behave in ways his wife would not approve of, as is illustrated in the scene at the fireplace the boy witnesses between the two of them as he is trying to escape. That scene in particular made me think a young boy was attaching meaning to something he doesn't completely understand and making it the fault of the evil being that has entered their home. I also found it interesting that his 11-year-old friend had to go away at the end of the book to save everyone and make everything right again. It is unclear if she will ever be back. It is reminiscent of Frodo saving the Shire but not for himself. I wonder if Gaiman is telling us that in order to rid the world of evil, some good must die, either literally or through the loss of our innocence. As the story ends, the man who was the boy has opened some old wounds, sometimes necessary for healing to occur. I'm not sure he has any more answers than he had when he came. The ones he receives from old Mrs. Hemstock may verify the fantasy or simply be answers that fit within his childhood delusion. That is my impression of the story as a whole. It is interesting to me that the premise for this story is based on a childhood memory of a lodger dying in the back of his dad's car when Gaiman was a 7-year-old boy. That was the seed for the story. I have found that many of my writing ideas are ways I work through events in my life that I believe my subconscious would like explained or fixed in some way. It makes me wonder if our writing can, in the abstract of our minds, fix the past for us. That is an empowering thought. The duck pond that is Letty's ocean is a concept that is appealing. It brings to mind that from small things can come big things. I like the parallel Gaiman makes about having a whole world fit within the pages of a book. The concept of a family that had lived at the end of the lane for 1,000 years with no one really noticing because the house is 1,000 years old speaks to the idea that in daily life so many things of importance simply go unnoticed. Another quote I like was when Letty and the narrator are talking about their ages. On page 30, a lady's gone mad in that house, she told me, and it would not have occurred to me to doubt her. She has money in the mattress. Now she won't get out of bed in case someone takes it from her. How do you know? She shrugged. Once you've been around for a bit, you get to know stuff. I kicked a stone. By a bit, do you mean a really long time? She nodded. How old are you really? I asked. 11. I thought about it for a bit, and then I asked, how long have you been 11 for? She smiled at me. This shows him to be an observant boy, one who might notice things that others would ignore. He has the flexibility of moving in and out of worlds. He does it daily in the books he reads. We see him understanding things that cannot be taken. We see him understanding that things cannot always be taken at face value. I also like that Letty practices magic with the heart of an 11-year-old, taking foolish chances such as taking the boy to the field with her to get rid of the entity, and in so doing allows his inexperience to unleash Ursula on their world. I like the way the book plays with memory. Gaiman uses the senses here as he recalls a memory. We know how tightly a particular memory can be to a song, the smell of lavender, of bread baking, or of the stillness of a field before a storm is about to hit. The problem with memory is that the brain only puts in what is perceived by its owner. A 7-year-old will lay down a very different memory of an event and attach an interpretation that may be very different from the one an adult might make in the very same situation. For me, that is the thread of uncertainty throughout the book. What is the reality of an adult retrieving a memory laid down against the magic of childhood? Gaiman won't tell us what is true. He leaves it for the reader to decide. A lovely reminder that as writers, we need to trust our readers enough to let them draw their own conclusions. We are left with the question of what we do once we have finished a quest. In the book club interview, Gaiman speculates that science can be magic. That's the trick, isn't it? Anything we don't understand can be perceived as magic. And that's the end of my discussion. So thank you very much for listening. You all have a great day.